Now, Côte d'Ivoire's UN representative says that the world body is overstretched and can't provide security for all of the country's civilians. Troops loyal to President Laurent Gbagbo shot dead 6 women in the northern district of Abidjan during a rally in support of Alassane Ouattara on Thursday. The UN says that the country's crisis must be given as much attention as the unrest in Libya.
We don't want any differentiation in the treatment of those crises. That's the same thing. There's the same civilians who are killed, be it in Libya and Côte d'Ivoire. Maybe the magnitude is more in Libya, but that's the same thing. They are using war weapons to kill peaceful civilians. So that should be addressed, and that's the responsibility of the international community to protect the civilian.
Bombs exploded near a mosque packed for Friday prayers in northwestern Pakistan. 9 people were killed after the remote-controlled bomb was detonated in Nowshera district. 30 others were wounded, and officials are expecting the number of fatalities to climb. A local government minister said that the bomb was controlled remotely. Also in Pakistan, mourners have gathered for the funeral of the former minorities minister, Shahbaz Bhatti. Security was tightened around Islamabad's main church where the service was held. Bhatti was shot dead as he left home for work on Wednesday. He'd been calling for reforms to Pakistan's controversial blasphemy law. Now, NASA's latest rocket launch has ended in failure.
3, 2, 1, 0, and ignition of the Taurus rocket with glory, monitoring how changes in Earth climate may affect our lives.
After blasting off, NASA officials say that the rocket failed to reach orbit after its protective cover didn't detach. The satellite was set to measure aerosols, or the level of chemicals from aerosols in the Earth's atmosphere, to help scientists understand their impact on climate. And of course now it won't.
3, 2.
Now, a quick recap of the top stories this hour. Friday prayers across the Arab world are being accompanied by more protests in Libya. Protesters gathered in the eastern city of Benghazi. Thousands of people continue to demand that leader Muammar Gaddafi leaves. And Egypt's new Prime Minister, Essam Sharaf, has been addressing crowds in Cairo's Tahrir Square alongside a senior member of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Prime Minister told the crowd he'll work hard to realise their demands, and if he can't, he'll step down. More news soon here on Al Jazeera.
Began as a demonstration and turned into a revolution. 2 weeks of anti-government protests and Egypt is on a knife edge. Hosni Mubarak declares he won't run again for president. His son, Gamal, has been ruled out as the next in line. And a vice president, Omar Suleiman, has been appointed for the first time in 30 years. Egypt's health ministry says 11 people have been killed. But agencies report more than 300 deaths, with thousands more wounded. When protests began on the 25th of January, peaceful demonstrations were met with a brutal police force. As the calls for regime change move into their 3rd week, Egyptians have broken down the barrier of fear. But cracks between the protesters have started to show.
What was really interesting about the 3rd week of these protests is that everyone was talking about the momentum and momentum being lost, but the momentum that was being lost wasn't actually inside Liberation Square, where people were very much still united together in this quest to bring down Hosni Mubarak. The momentum that was changing was outside of the square, in the other parts of Cairo and beyond, where people had started to say, well, listen, Hosni Mubarak has now said that he won't run again. You only have to bear him for another few months. Why don't the protesters just leave the square? They've got what they want. So people were talking about a loss of momentum, but we never felt that inside Liberation Square. We only felt it outside.
I announced that I will similarly remain adamant to continue to shoulder my responsibility.
An immovable head of state and resolute protesters standing firm on their call for the president to resign. Egypt has reached deadlock. Tahrir Square has become a tent city, a permanent vigil for the anti-government protesters.
They're every single night they're sleeping under the wheels of tanks and armoured personnel carriers, determined not to be squeezed in, as they put it, with this protest.
The mood by that morning had begun to shift a little bit, in the sense that shops were opening, stores were opening, very basic stuff, but enough to get enough commercial activity going where people themselves were beginning to question whether or not this prolonged standoff was serving the interests of the country, or whether or not it was being somewhat detrimental to the economic activity of daily life.
A fading momentum and Mubarak's promises of reform have threatened to derail the anti-government movement.
Well, by the time we had entered the third week, we could clearly see that there was no progress being made in terms of the talks. I mean, President Mubarak was adamant on trying to engage the protesters through political means. He was trying to appease them with what was described as half-hearted measures. And the protesters were very much defiant. You know, on more than one occasion, we felt that they were, you know, maybe their support was going to wane, perhaps their morale was going to decrease. But in reality, it never did.
Calls for regime change are in danger of dying out. But anti-government protesters receive a spark of hope from an unknown Egyptian. Google executive and political activist Wael Ghonem is released after his arrest by plainclothes policemen at the start of the protests. As an architect of the dissent that ignited a revolution, his emotional interview injects a sense of purpose into the softening protests.
I want to say to every mother and every father that lost his child, I'm sorry, but this is not our fault. I swear to God, this is not our fault. It is the fault of everyone who is holding on to power greedily and would not let it go. I want to leave.
Wael Ghonem's interview was definitely a game changer.